The more that we stay quiet, the more the oppression gains power. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Virtue Signal. I'm Bill Whittle, or you can just call me Pinky if you want. I'm here with my friend Alfonso Rachel, and you can call him Zoe if you'd like. And here we are on yet another edition of the Virtue Signal. Zoe, it's getting a little past time worry about these things, but nevertheless, just out of formality. You and I, we've been friends for a long time, but we have also may or may not have been members of an organization that may or may not have existed for conservatives in Hollywood. And that has been defunct for a while now, and I miss it a lot. So what I thought we might talk about today is something beyond the idea of friendship, and that would be fellowship. Obviously, the Fellowship of the Rings is a kind of the cultural knee-jerk reaction. But that's kind of, as usual with Tolkien, that's pretty much the essence of it. It's, in the case, just using the Fellowship of the Rings as an example that many people have had experience with, one form or another, it doesn't necessarily mean a group of friends necessarily, although usually over time they get to be close friends. It's really got to do with a gathering of people of a like mind and of a like purpose and a like moral code and so on. And the restorative power of fellowship. Forget the offensive power of it in terms of the ability to get things done and what it's like to have people watching your back. But just from a point of view of people like us who've been watching all of this stuff just kind of coming in and stuff, just the ability to be with other people of like minds is enormously encouraging. And we could use some courage these days. Now, to some degree, obviously, this show is a fellowship, and our members are a fellowship, and the conservative movement essentially is an even larger fellowship. But it's not quite the same as being in the same room as the same people, with the same people. I thought maybe we'd start by getting your take on what it feels like to be outnumbered, at least in terms of conservatives in entertainment business in Los Angeles. What it feels like to be in the company of other people who are in exactly that same boat, because it made a profound effect on me.
In the beginning, it felt great. And I appreciate it. I guess if we're going to, take the liberty to talk about it, because kind of like Fight Club, it was one of those things that we weren't supposed to talk about. But I would find that sometimes I would see on news outlets more high profile people who had come into the group or be welcome to the group go on national news and talk about it. And I'm like, I don't know if they got the memo. But I guess, we're going to go ahead and talk about it. But when going in, it was great because I love the idea, the fellowship. However, I guess, like for me, maybe my experience was a little bit different. I didn't come into the fellowship as a Hollywood entertainer. I didn't have a resume of whether being in movies in any sort of capacity. I was a YouTuber, right, who had viral videos. So for some reason, the criteria was, I guess, maybe adjusted for me. And hey,
it was adjusted for me too, pal.
Right. And which I'm very grateful for. It's like, wow, man, I got to be a part of this. I guess but the fellowship was good, but it's like, okay, now what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do? Because we had all these resources, all these connections. And don't get me wrong, the fellowship was supposed to be first. It shouldn't and wasn't supposed to be a thing where it's like, hey, I'm going to rub elbows with some Hollywood conservative celebrities. Here's my script. It wasn't supposed to be that. However, there should have been something more fruitful. Like, say, for instance, you mentioned that even right now, what we have with the Virtue Signal, with our audience, we have a fellowship. We talk about things that people are talking about. We're trying to clarify what these virtues are and make sure that we don't have other people's twisted ideas of virtue ruling over us. We have the right to question what these virtues are. And we have a fellowship with these people. But not only is there a fellowship, they're trying to help it be fruitful. They support. And there wasn't that kind of support system in the fellowship that it was supposed to be. Like I said, once again, it wasn't all about, hey, what can I get out of this? Mm-hmm. However, there should have been a utility to it. It's like, okay, we have these connections and we have these resources. Why are we in this speakeasy? Why aren't we taking the fight to them with the resources that we have and produce competitive narratives to what the left is doing to basically corrupt the culture more and more? So those kinds of things kind of left me disillusioned. And one more thing, it was like all you had to do to be in the group, it seemed, was like love America. That's not enough.
And be in the entertainment business to some degree, yeah.
Right. It's just like, oh, you love America. That's great. Because the push for big tent conservatism or big tent patriotism, whichever, ends up being a big tent of obscurity. Where's the standard? It's almost like, we're telling people, hey, if you want to come into our country, you're going to have to assimilate. And these are the standards of what we're going to do, of what it is. This is the law. Yeah. But we don't exercise that same standard when it comes to coming into the more right-leaning or Republican voting tent. Oh, be whatever you want. Now we got no standards. Now we have a tent of obscurity, and it's going to be doomed to collapse. So that was my,
I get so much from talking to you. I don't want to make this about that particular group of people. I want to make it about fellowship in general. But you raise a really important point that I had kind of felt, but I'd never really clearly seen before, and that is that fellowship needs to have a target, a destination, needs to be about something. And I think that's probably what hurt this particular fellowship, but that's not really the point. When you were talking about people sitting around and not really doing anything, I thought, wow, so imagine the Fellowship of the Ring from Lord of the Rings, and instead of going on this quest to destroy the ring in Mount Doom, they'll just sit around in Rivendell. Just sit around once a week, get together, have a couple of, drinks, hang out on the balcony, look at the waterfalls. These people would not have been friends under those circumstances. The whole point of the Fellowship of the Ring, as a matter of fact, is entirely about the fact that the people coming into this were not only fractious, they despise each other. Elves and dwarves and the human guy, and you got Gondor, and you got the everybody, and all of them are essentially at cross purposes until they're given a goal that unites them, and this is why fellowship is different than friendship, because. And I hadn't realized it until you really put it so plainly, because it has to be, I think, about something. One of the things that's most clear in human history is the bond that's formed among men, really, in combat, under fire. Mm-hmm. And especially in World War II. In World War II, because it was so monumental, and because there was a draft, but even in the case of the draft, there are so many people volunteering. I think more than any other war in our nation's history, with the possible exception of the Civil War, you had people from everywhere, And when you'd see movies from about World War II, especially ones made in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you would see this platoon of guys, and it would be, he's the Italian from the Bronx, and here's a Jew from here, and here's Tex from the farm, and here's and here's the guy from Los Angeles, and they were all different identities, and oftentimes these identities were in a fair amount of friction here in the world, but when you got them out into a platoon, either in Germany or in Guadalcanal or something, all of a sudden, those things don't exactly go away, but they actually become even bond you even closer. It becomes like it's not like a running joke. It becomes he's just a that Dago bastard, and it's a term of affection, right? and that affection between formerly adversarial groups is only able to exist because of the outside pressure. In the case of the Pacific, that outside pressure would be the Japanese, right? Which have to be defeated, are forcing these disparate elements together and melding them, welding them into a group. Once they're welded together, those friendships will remain for the rest of their lives. There's no question about that. But you're right. That kind of fellowship is the idea of a bunch of people from different backgrounds getting together, but you're right, they have to get together for a purpose. It has to be about something. And I think that's a pretty good tee up for modern viewers to say, what do we do? What action do we take with this fellowship that we have? You know, the people who become members of BillWhittle.com are producing 8 or 9 shows a week, and those shows have a reach that never ceases to amaze me. I'll never, ever, ever stop being astonished by having people who not only did I not think would be my kind of audience, but just astonished, amazed to be my kind of audience. Some purple-haired girl on the beach in San Francisco will come up, on the beach in Santa Monica will come up and say, I'm a really big fan of your work. You say, what? Thank you. You know, what? So what do we do about this? We've got people now in America, we've got half the country that is the raw materials for a big fellowship, right? Mm-hmm. People who have extremely different backgrounds, but they have a common set of goals and ideas. They have the same idea of what happiness is. And that happiness usually consists of being left alone, having freedom, having the ability to live your own life. The people in our fellowship have no desire to tell other people how to live. That alone is enormously useful to a fellowship, right? You don't have to do what I tell you. We just you be you and I'll be me. So what do we seem to be having, as you said, a real problem with weaponizing that. And I mean weaponizing in this case in a good way.
Right. Oh, man. And, in the previous episodes, we talk about things like fear, strengths, and this fellowship, despite the things that they were facing, like we're talking about the Fellowship of the Ring, despite the thing that they were facing, they still had to pony up and go out and face that dread that was taking over, people's lives, right?
You had to pony up.
Exactly. Cowboy up,
that's it,
right?
man. You had to have skin in the game. You had to ante up. You had to put something into this. You didn't just get to ride.
Yes, right. Because, these things can get you tossed into like a real, and this isn't just in fantasy world. This is in real life, where a person, it's like, look, man, you got to own up, and despite you might get thrown in jail, you might get executed, you might get tortured. It's like, look, if we don't step up, these things are more likely going to happen anyway. And we need to try to fight against this. Well, now we got people that are afraid of Facebook jail. These are the torturous, this is the persecution and don't get me wrong, if your livelihood kind of depends on, this is just beyond being social. This is people's livelihoods. People put their business and they use these things to promote with. And once you're taken out of it, that can really make your business suffer. But at the same time, you can't just sit by and do nothing because the evil grows. And, I've seen people in our field, say things like, hey, that picture that you have with me, can you take that down?
I've had that too.
I've
had that too.
And it's like, okay, how are we going to fight against this evil when you're more concerned about, I guess, your image? Are you concerned about getting a job? Are you really working now? So things like that.
The last time that happened to me, it just really cut the heart out of me,
Yes.
It was like, all right, let's get this done. And, could you maybe just not say that, like I'm a lifelong conservative or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could say that. Sure, of course I can. Absolutely, I'd be happy to take that up for you, and you can take my heart with it.
Thank you.
Really.
And the thing is, and each one feels justified to do it. Now, if you were to say this in confidence to somebody, say, yeah, this person basically threw me under the bus. I feel more like a closet friend, than anything else. They'll tell you that that's really awful. I can't believe somebody would do something like that. And I'm like, well, you did too. Yep. Oh, but it's, these are my circumstances. Different. It's different, and it's that kind of fellowship. It shows why. I mean, the left is going to do what they do, but as the saying goes, evil, persists when good men do nothing. But I think it'd be good for us. And don't get me wrong, Bill, because I'm not the kind of person to say that, hey, well, I deserve an opportunity because I'm a patriot and I'm a conservative. So whatever work I do, you should stand behind it. No, it's not like that at all. I have to consider that, you know what, maybe they don't want to work with me because my stuff sucks. I don't know. Maybe they have their reasons. I'm not going to try to pass judgment or anything like that.
I didn't want to say anything.
Thank you, man. Thank you. But, even with PJTV, when we were at PJTV, I'm so grateful that, y'all saw something in my work that was usable. Some things, they thought that I could do, and I had to step in and say, actually, I don't do that. Like man on the street things, going to people and putting on the spot questions like, look, man, I don't do that.
I won't do them either. I'm not made that way.
I'm not made that way. Or people, say, hey, man, I want you to do, become part of my comedy tour. Or, they want me to do stand-up comedy. And I'm like, I'm not a comedian. I have my moments where I can be funny. I try to make my videos fun and stuff like that, but I'm not a bona fide comedian. I'm not a joke writer or anything like that. That's not what I do. So, knowing what our strengths are and knowing what, even like, in the Fellowship of the Ring, these people are gathered, they're very diverse and they have a different set of strengths and skills. And those things were put to task when called, even if it was really difficult for them to tap into their own wheelhouse. That's what they were, called in for. And
they were not only asking you to put things in, they were also asking you to take things out.
Indeed, there's sacrifices that are going to be made. It's all about a sacrifice.
I mean, that's what happened historically back at our previous employer, right? And I remember thinking, why are you messing with this guy like that? Why are you asking Zoe to, well, don't talk about this so much. It's like, what do you mean? You just can't, you can't do that. You can't go to somebody who's got a voice and tell them, yeah, we really love your voice. We just don't want you to talk about the things that gave you the voice in the first place.
Yes.
And I was just gobsmacked by that. But yes, you're right. You're right about all of it.
Yeah, and why wouldn't they want these things talked about? Because of fear. And it's not because my talking about it would be a liability. It wasn't a liability before. It was part of how I grew my audience. But certain, whether they're biases or whether they have certain sentiments about it and they don't want them talked about because of how it may affect them personally or whatnot, there's supposed to be a bigger picture here. There's supposed to be sacrifices that are going to be made, and you can't be afraid to talk about these things. Because as we could see, and this has been a lot of with, if we could just kind of like touch on the political aspect of it, there are certain cultural things that a lot of Republican voters have been discouraged from talking about. Too often, Republicans are told, well, we should stay away from these issues, stay away from things like LGBT, stay away from the issue of abortion and things like that. And I'm like, why are we being told to stay away from these issues and not talk about them? They talk about it all the time.
Right.
We don't have to bring it up. That's the thing about it. We don't have to bring it up. They are going to bring it up, and they're always sharpening their argument and they're pressed for it. So why aren't we, iron is supposed to sharpen iron. Why aren't we sharpening each other on these issues? So when they bring them up, we're ready.
Always on the defense. We're always on the defense. Always.
Yes. Yeah. And so these things, if we don't address them, we will be ruled by them. And now people will say like, well, abortion is a personal decision. And if it doesn't affect me, I guarantee you, yes, it does. Because here's the thing about abortion. If a person feels like they have the right to take the life of a human being, guess what? They're going to feel like they have the right to make you pay for it. Okay. So these things will translate into things like more taxes.
And you're a human being too. So if they can make that decision that easily,
that's
you
right.
should maybe be thinking about your own worth to people like that. And
that's not a speculation. That's been proven in history, right? Democrats take the liberty to disqualify personhood at will. That's what they do. They did that with my ancestors. All right. That's just what they do. So if we allow these things to go unchecked, then that's what we end up being ruled. Those things turn into a lot of oppressive policies. And if we're not ready to address those things and just steer away from them because we assume that that's going to be some political expedience, that's a big mistake.
Let's go back to something you mentioned, talking about kind of the modern fellowship of conservatives in general, and just even the small groups of people who are groups of friends and stuff. Let's go back to this idea of Facebook jail. When I started in that particular fellowship, and when I started doing this work pretty much full time, previous I had been an editor in Hollywood for about 15 years, and had a pretty decent resume. I was getting hired pretty much all the time. And I started writing Eject as a blog, but that was part-time work. Even by the time I made the decision to get into video, it was getting, I could feel that around me people were kind of saying, this guy's a conservative, I think. But certainly once I decided to put my face on these things and get out there in front of videos, I had a really serious moment. And when I said, if I do this, I'm never going to work in this town again, ever going to work in this town again. And I remember thinking, I've talked about this before, I remember thinking, Iraq was still going on strong then. And I thought, 18-year-olds that are out there being killed right now, so I can live in a free country, and I'm worried that I don't get a chance to work on a Hollywood set in an air-conditioned suite, cutting some celebrity talking about some other celebrity. This is going to prevent me from doing it. And so this is the thing that I think we need to understand as a fellowship of friends out there who are watching the show. It's a terrible dilemma, but it only got to be a dilemma because we let it get to become a dilemma. Mm-hmm. The dilemma is, and I saw this all the time in this particular fellowship, as did you, that there are people out there who have families to feed and rents to pay and so on, and they are lifelong cinematographers, director of photography, sound guys, stuntmen, whatever. If they come out and speak their mind, they'll never work again, and they won't be able to prove it either, because what most people don't understand about Hollywood, or at least about gig-based jobs, are you can never get hired again, and you'll never know the reason. The phone call just won't come. It's not like you got fired after 25 years of service and you have some kind of case to make, No, you'll just never work again. And these people would say, it's this incredible torment for me to have to keep my head down, but if I don't keep my head down, then I'm out of a job and my family doesn't get to eat. And I completely understand that. I 100% do, and I never ever once felt like, you're miserable. It never once crossed my mind. I do this because I can afford to. As it turns out, I didn't know it at the time, turned out I could actually make a living at it. But the only reason it got to the point where if people found out that in entertainment, if people found out that you were a conservative, you'd never work again, the only reason it got to that point was because of what you just mentioned, was because we don't express our opinion with confidence, because we let them set the battlefield, we let them set the moral tone, we let them set the narrative so that we were automatically the bad guys, and we didn't stand up for it when we should have at the beginning. And so we're stuck in this cycle now where either Facebook jail or loss of your job, loss of your friends, loss of social connections, slander, people can make statements about you that will follow you around, followed me around. I'm sure it's followed you around too. And all of this is a result of us not having the courage of our convictions. You mentioned it earlier. We're always reacting to what they say. And that means that we are usually reacting because they've already established the narrative, right? So the Democrats, which held slaves, are now, of course, the party that they're the anti-racists. And the way they'll prove that they're anti-racist is by making sure that that the individual races are kept completely separate and that each one of them is treated like little children who can't take care of themselves. Mm. We don't have the confidence. We have the belief, but we don't have the confidence, which is why people like Andrew Breitbart, and especially Rush Limbaugh, were always just so amazing to me. And I'm in this line of work, I would hear Rush say things that are just like, what? Yes, of course he said it. Of course it's true. And he said it because it's true, and he doesn't care. Now, of course, he got to be fairly wealthy that way, but he wasn't in the beginning. And so we're stuck in this trap where we don't have the courage to get ourselves out of things because the consequences are so dire now, for many of us anyway. But we got into that trouble because we didn't speak up, and the more that we stay quiet, the more the oppression gains power, and the worse things get. And comes a point somewhere, I think, for all of us, where we have to just say, listen, this is the price of freedom, is in this information war. It's not that you're going to be expected to go over and try to take Mount Suribachi. You may have to go to Facebook prison. That may be what you have to do in order to keep this country free. And when you compare it to some of the sacrifices that have been made, it's not a big sacrifice to make. And I think we ought to start thinking about things that way. We really ought to start thinking about the fact that we can talk about courage and patriotism and all the rest of it, but if we keep our heads down about it, then we're talking about courage and patriotism at no cost. And that doesn't require any courage. And frankly, not a whole lot of patriotism either.
Indeed, man. It reminds me of I can't remember the actor's name. He was on the Cosby Show, and I guess it was big news because they saw this guy. He was like Lisa Bonet's husband in the Cosby Show, and it went big news because they saw him working at Trader Joe's. And it's like, wow, how is it that this guy who was on this iconic TV show, how is it that he's working at Trader Joe's? And for those who are worried, it speaks to this. For those who are worried that, man, if I speak up about my conservative values, I'll never get to work as a cameraman, or I won't get to work as a sound guy or anything like that. Well, this guy actually had a pretty good career, and it wasn't that he spoke up about anything. The guy's now working at Trader Joe's. And then Tyler Perry found out about it and said, hey, and I don't know what became of it, but Tyler Perry said, like, give me a call. I think we got some work for you. That's a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing. You know, it's like he heard about it and said, what can I do about this? Now, what I say that for is, how is it that, and I even saw a lot of conservative actors or, those on the right of center coming out and say, oh, God bless, that's right. You work, man. You get out there and you work. And I can totally respect that and all that sort of stuff. It's like, really? So
why are you being so quiet?
Exactly. Now, some of these they're outed on Twitter and they've made their positions known on Twitter, but you have a lot of those who will quietly say, yeah, I could totally respect that. Yeah, it's like you go and you still make an honest living. There's nothing bad about working at Trader Joe's. It's totally respectable. So why aren't you willing to make that same kind of sacrifice? Why are you being quiet? You know, it's like you'll applaud this guy, but you won't do the same thing. And it was a little bit of a slap in the face for me, because I'm like seeing all these people, people that we know flood in and like give a like or something, like, they'll do just enough to let them know that they're approving, but not really step out there. While folks like, if I just might say like myself, whose career has been decimated by speaking out. A guy who will definitely not get to work in Hollywood again. If I ever really did, but, thank God though, there's folks like you who say, you know what, I'll extend my resources, man. And I'd like to do something with this guy. If I could jam with this guy, I'd like to do it. We
did that because of several thousand new members decided that they wanted to put their money where their mouth was, and that gave us the resources to do what I've been wanting to do from the beginning. But yes. The credit doesn't go to me. I just know talent when I see it. The credit goes to those people who stepped up when we asked them to over a year ago, and gave us the resources to do this.
And thank y'all. Yeah, yes, I really appreciate it. And the thing is, part of the reason why they know about it is, also because of you. And so I don't take those things for granted. And, I think it should be an example, to a lot of people who are right of center in Hollywood, to where they can put their resources. It's your stuff. You do what you want. Don't get me wrong. And nobody owes each other anything in terms of that, right? But if you are going to say, oh man, what's happening to my country, then we do kind of owe it to that idea that our country's being taken over. Maybe we might want to put our resources to use in helping to preserve it.
Yeah, and maybe Facebook jail is not the worst possible fate for a patriot in time of grave danger for the country. It's not an awful lot to ask.
Yeah.
This show is made possible by all of our long-term members at BillWhittle.com, obviously, who kept the operation going, but especially by the new people that joined up a little over a year ago. That gave us the opportunity to do this, and we're gonna be asking a whole new group of people to join us soon. I know I've been teasing this forever, but these things work on Bill time, which is somewhere between geological time and daylight savings time. In any event, thank you very much for your support. As always, on behalf of Alfonso Rachel, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us here on The Virtue Signal.